I'm very happy to be here and to have an opportunity to share with you what I've learned myself the last 3 years that I've been working directly with children. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay. There are 3 main parts to the presentation that I'm going to give, and I wanted to have a little bit of time at the end for some discussion and questions, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen because we are late. So we'll just see how it goes. I'm going to talk about just a little bit about children's services and children's program at the Domestic Violence Assistance Center so you can get an idea of what we do with the children. I'm going to talk a little bit about the effects of violence on children.
What age group are you talking about when you say children, Anita?
0 to 17. Whoever comes into the shelter, that's who we work with. Okay, Lisa? I'm going to talk about a little bit about the effects on these children, and then I'm going to talk mostly about how to break this cycle, or to stop the violence, or to intervene. All of those things I look to as pretty much the same thing. And hopefully we will have enough time for questions. Children's programming at the Domestic Violence Assistance Center consists of a full-time children's coordinator and trained children's advocates, which is part of the Children's Advocate program. We have 10 of them. There are 3 main components of the program. The most important is direct care. That's simply sitting down with children and playing with them. Playing blocks, playing Monopoly, reading to them, spending time with them, paying attention to their needs, talking with them. It's extremely therapeutic for children to be able to play. It's a release. It's a way for them to get out the emotions and the crisis that they're in. It's not just trivial things. It's just so important. So that's what we do. We try to give children an opportunity to express their emotions and feelings about what they've experienced. We use a planned curricula to help them explore violence and their own attitudes toward it. We give them appropriate ways to resolve conflict. We try to show that to them and model that for them. We try to teach them how to interact with other children. We build up their self-esteem and let them know how wonderful they are. Children at the shelter receive a minimum, we like to give them a minimum of 25 hours of direct care a week. That's time when a trained adult is playing just with them. We like to have at least a 3 to 4 hour shift every day that somebody is there for them. In addition, we have a support group for children who experience domestic violence. That's open to children who are in the shelter as well as children in the community, and that happens in an evening. And the children from the community will come with their mothers, but older children can come without a parent with them. So that's the program that we have that's direct care with children. The second component of our children is doing an intake and an assessment with children. We like to do an intake procedure as quickly as a child gets there, hopefully within 24 hours, the sooner the better, because this is an opportunity to sit down with a child and give that child information about family violence and about where they are. So that we can say to a little child who's 4 years old, this is a place where moms come if someone's trying to hurt them, and they bring their children with them. And that's why you're here. So that right away the secret's out, the wall drops, and the child realizes that everyone's here for the same reason, and they begin to feel safe. We do that during the intake procedure. We let them know that what happened to them is not their fault. It's extremely important to give children that information. And we also can give them an opportunity then to ask for what they need. And of course, the older they are, the better they're able to do that. We assess where they are in their lives right now, emotionally, physically, how are they with what's happened to them, with this state of crisis that they're in. And at this point, if necessary, we will make community referrals and we will try to get the children what they need from other places in the community. If they need counseling, we try to get it for them. If they need medical attention, we try to get it to them. If they need a tutor because they've missed so much school, just whatever they need. If they need a pair of shoes, we try to get them what they need. And we work really closely with the mom to make sure the child gets what he or she needs at this point. And so that's the second component of the program. And the third component is really more a priority, and that's to keep the child safe. And that's my #1 priority as a children's advocate, is keeping children safe. And this requires, again, working very closely with the mom to assure that the child will remain safe in her care. That's my number one priority, and I have to say that's the number one priority of our program. All the staff at the Domestic Violence Assistance Center is keeping women and children safe. That's what we're there for, and that's what we do. And that's going to have a lot to do with some of the other things that I'm going to talk about. So I want you to remember that. I'd like to talk a little bit now about the effects of domestic violence on children. And I first want to focus on witnessing abuse. I want to make it very, very clear that in my mind, to witness a mother being assaulted, beaten, put down, verbally abused, controlled, and isolated, that's abuse. That is abuse. Every child has a right to have a home that is safe, that's a haven, that they can come to and get support, nurturance, and love. And so if they're witnessing a mother, their mother being beaten and torn down, that's abuse. Even if they're never touched, they're being abused just by being there. And I want to make that really clear because I believe in that strongly. There's lots of statistics to draw from as far as what the effects of domestic violence and partner assault are on children who witness it. I don't like to lean on them real heavily or quote them because we all know that studies have many, many variables. They can be used randomly to prove many different things. I think it's real common sense to assume that if you're a child and you are watching your mother being beaten and being, verbally attacked and called names all the time, that's going to have a lot of effect on you and your life, where you go, what your choices are, what kind of a relationship you have as an adult. That's going to impact you as you grow up. So I don't think we need studies to make that assumption. And if any of you have come from violent homes, which I did, then you know that it's very, very hard to grow up like that. And it doesn't have to be a father, it can be a boyfriend as well. And certainly a child is going to be afraid for his or her mother's life if that's happening. And they carry that fear with them into school, into their relationships, later on into their jobs, their work. They're going to carry that. Now, I think where the studies come in is because we're all different and we're all individuals. The way that impacts that is different for everyone. I'm going to react differently than someone else is. Say you will take that information and that experience and react differently to it. But the studies are very conclusive that living in a home where there is spousal assault severely affects children. And just to run through some of the things that they're more prone to, anxiety, depression, insomnia, learning disorders. ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is commonly found in children that come from violent homes. And I'd also like to say that that disorder affects boys more than girls, and that disorder prones a child to be very violent and very hard to work with. Actually lashing out. If you know any little boys or girls that have ADHD, you know that they're violent children. Children from violent homes tend not to do well in school. They have lots of different kinds of learning disorders. It's just pretty hard to pay attention when you're thinking about your family. They're at a higher risk for everything. Teenage pregnancy, substance abuse, suicide, truancy, delinquency, homicide, and violent criminal acts. Just at a higher risk for all of those things. A Massachusetts study found that 98% of incarcerated felons came from violent homes. That was almost all of them. And again, there'll be different studies in different states, but the figures are very high from the number of incarcerated felons who come from violent homes. And I have lots of different information up here that collaborates that if you'd like to come up and look at it afterwards. From my own work, there's no doubt in my mind that children from violent homes are in real trouble. And by that I mean that it's going to be a lot harder for them to get to a place in their life where they can be productive, where they can make positive contributions to their society and their community, where they can have healthy relationships, and where they can raise healthy children. Teens and adolescents who've been exposed to violence all their lives are in the most trouble. If they're young children and they're removed from the violent home, And they're put into a safe environment where there is nurturing and quality care. They recover, because I've seen it. They bounce back. The younger they are, the harder they bounce. They're so resilient. They're so wonderful. I have seen amazing changes in children after being in our facility for just 3 or 4 days. All of a sudden, they're safe. They know why they're there. They realize that some changes are being made and the situation's going to start working toward a solution. Someone's playing with them, talking with them. They're getting a lot of love from all of the staff that's there and from all of the other women that's there. There's children to play with, there's toys. And they start to change almost immediately the younger they are. The older they are, don't see that kind of recovery. The healing process doesn't start nearly as fast. There's a lot more pain. There's a lot more they've been through. Patterns are set and established. Older children have learned to hold it in, and it's just not going to go away by someone saying, let's sit down and play Monopoly together. That's not going to do it. So that's why, again, we want to intervene, and we want to start working with children at a very young age. The younger, the better. But adolescents are another story, and I'd like to talk to you about some adolescents that I've worked with in the last year, because I think it gets more meaningful when you can hear actual people. In the last fiscal year, that's 93 to 94, and it just ended here in July, the Domestic Violence Assistance Center here in Missoula served a total of 201 children. We provided 4,480 days of shelter to 104 women and 139 children. That's a total of 12.3 years of shelter time, or of providing shelter in just 1 year. So we had a lot of children staying with us for many, many days. And that's a great thing too. If a child can stay for a month or 2 months or 3 months, then you get to spend a lot of time with that child and work very closely with that child. Many children that we see are just passing through. They just come for a night or two. But we had 11 adolescents out of those 139 children who stayed longer than 2 weeks. And we got to know these kids pretty well. We spent a lot of time with them. We did a lot of different things with them. And they're the ones I'd like to talk to you about. Of those 11 children, one 14-year-old girl is pregnant and no longer in school. 2 girls, one 15 and one 14, have quit school. One 14-year-old girl has severe behavior problems and is 2 grades behind in school. And by severe behavior problems, I mean she is starting to be violent and abusive toward her mother. 2 girls are each 1 grade behind in school. 3 boys, one 11, one 15, and one 14, are each 1 year behind in school. And of those, one of those boys gets extremely depressed and will cry for days at a time. The remaining 2 girls are with their mothers, who have permanently left their relationships, and we're in touch, and so far they're doing really well. They're very much involved in school, extracurricular activities, and they're doing well. Out of those 11, 2 were sexually abused by their mother's abusers. Both of them were girls. 4 were physically abused by their mother's abusers. 2 girls and 2 boys. 1 girl was severely verbally abused by her mother's batterer. And by severely verbally abused, I mean she was called a cunt, she was called a whore, she was told that the only reason anybody's going to go out with her is because she spreads her legs, and she was told the only reason anybody would want to go out with her is if she spreads her legs. That kind of verbal abuse. She was 13 years old. All 11 of these children were witnesses to their mother's physical assaults. All of them. I think that's grim, and I think it's easy to see that these children are going to have trouble getting through that in their lives and healing from those experiences. And these were just the adolescents. I haven't recounted to you the same things, same kinds of conditions for all the other 128 children that came through our shelter, because it would take too long. And obviously, there's lots of children who are still at home. And we never see them, and we never get to talk to them, and we never get to spend any time with them. A conservative figure, and this is a conservative figure, is that 60% of them, of all the children in our shelter, were either sexually or physically assaulted by their mother's batterers. And often, in addition, by extended family members, brothers, uncles, grandfathers. And that's a conservative estimate. I would say that it's higher. And that's what I want to talk about next. Witnessing abuse is abusive. That's an abuse. However, children who are in families where there is partner assault or spousal assault taking place are at a much greater risk of being physically or sexually abused by that person. Much greater risk. And this is something that most people don't realize. We're just beginning to realize this, especially people in child abuse prevention services. The extreme overlap between child abuse and spousal abuse, between child battering and spousal battering. There is just an incredible overlap. One reason is because the two entities, Battered Women's Movement, Child Prevention Movement, they evolved separately. They did not evolve together. And so the link between them is just starting to come to our attention. And it's just in the last 4 or 5 years that studies are being made. But in homes where there is partner assault taking place, you can be sure that that child is at a very great risk of being physically or sexually battered or assaulted by the same man who's assaulting and abusing the mother. So we have to look at that, and we have to start working together. Now, the extent to which that's happening, that varies. A Colorado study done by Lenore Walker, and you've heard her name a lot, found that 53% of batterers also batter the children that are in the home. Other studies have found anywhere from 35% to 70% batterers also batter and or sexually abuse the children that are in the household. In a Massachusetts and Connecticut study, 70% of the children who were found with serious physical injuries due to child abuse investigation, it was found that their mothers were also being battered themselves. And a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee in 1993 had this very startling figure that in homes where there is domestic violence or partner assault, children are abused at a rate of 1,000 times greater than the national average. And if you look in your manual where it talks about the effects of children, that figure is 1,500 times greater. They both came from the Senate Judiciary Committee, so I'm not sure which one's correct. But at any rate, it's pretty astounding. And as I just said, here at our Domestic Violence Assistance Center in Missoula, I would say that that figure is conservative at 60%. Other effects of children, the March of Dimes study just came out. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was startling. More women, women being battered at pregnancy caused more birth defects in children than all the diseases for which pregnant women are immunized put together. Daughters who live in violent homes are at a greater risk for sexual abuse. It's 6.5 times greater than for daughters who live in nonviolent homes. Recent studies show a very high correlation between teenage pregnancy and girls who were sexually and or physically abused and from violent homes. So one reaction or one way that girls respond or react to the violence, there's a high rate of pregnancy among those girls. Lack of boundaries, feelings that this is what they need to do to please men in their lives. I'm not, lots of different things going on there, but there's a high correlation there. Then turn it around, these young single mothers are at a greater risk of abusing their own children than other populations. And single mothers comprise a very large part of Child Protective Services caseload. So by failing to protect children from witnessing spousal abuse and from being victimized by their mother's abuser, we're putting a whole other generation at risk. It's overwhelming sometimes to me, so that's why I smile a lot. An estimated 3.3 million children live in families where one adult caretaker is physically assaulting the other adult caretaker on an ongoing basis. So the studies prove correct, and we're looking at about 70% of these also abusing and assaulting the children that are in that house. Then you can see that child abuse and spousal abuse they need to come together and they need to work together. And that's what I want to talk about next, is a way to break this cycle and to stop this violence. And the first thing I think that is very important is that we need different assessment tools. And we have to start using different assessment tools to determine if spousal abuse is happening when child abuse is happening. If child abuse is reported, is there also domestic violence taking place in that family? Because if there is, then our methods need to be different. Usually, they just need to be different if that's what's happening. And I think that's happening a lot. Domestic violence advocates and child protective service workers have to sit down together. They have to develop the best protocols and methods for getting the initial assessment, and then for dealing with the perpetrator, and for getting and keeping the mother and the child safe. So I see one thing that needs to happen to break this cycle is for those two agencies to really come together and to join hands and to reach out to each other. I think that needs to happen, and I would love to see that happen in this community. And I'm going to work really hard to try to make that happen. Keeping in line with that, getting and keeping the mother and children safe, that's the next thing that I want to talk about as far as a point to break that cycle. Altogether there's 5, and I've just done 1. So the second thing is to get the mother and the children safe. I think that's the second thing we have to do if we want to break this cycle, stop the violence, and start prevention on its way. We have to support a woman to get free and to stay free from a violent, assaultive, abusive relationship. Because so many batterers also batter the children that are in their household. Children cannot be safe unless their mothers are safe. Got to get them both safe. Studies show that mothers who are the victims of frequent abuse are more likely to victimize their own children. They're more likely to use physical means of solving conflicts with their children than mothers who are not in abusive relationships. Often a woman cannot attend to the needs of her children if she is living with fear, and as Jackie talked about so well, walking around on eggshells all the time. It's very, very difficult to be, parenting and attending to all those things under those circumstances. And I'd like to share 2 stories with you. One comes out of Boston, sponsored by the Massachusetts Coalition of Battered Women's Service Groups. And this is a woman's own story. He yelled at me to keep the kids quiet, and when the baby kept crying, he swatted her. He left her black and blue. The next morning, he told me that if I called DFS, he'd swear to the worker that I did it. I was terrified they would blame me and take away my baby. I was terrified of him, too. My husband just laughed at me. I was too scared to do anything, and he knew he had us trapped. And if we don't have the right assessment tool, and if we don't have the right kinds of protocols, if a child protective worker goes into that home to make an assessment for child abuse, they need to know what to look for to see what kind of violence and what all is happening in that family. And that's going to determine getting that woman and that child out of there if necessary to keep them both safe from that. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a case in Missoula, a little closer to home. This is not the woman's story. This is my retelling of her, but I think this is a good example of what I'm trying to get across to you, of getting women and children out of a violent situation and into a safe area. There was a woman in Missoula. She had 4 children, ages 4 weeks to 7 years. Her abuser assaulted her frequently with blows to the face. She told us she learned how to hold her head and clench her teeth in such a way that when he hit her, he would knock her teeth out. Her legs had permanent bruises from being kicked. He kicked the children too, but she told us never with his shoes on. Her children were made to stay in the basement whenever he ate. His demands always came first, and he was fussy about germs and cleanliness. Because of this, he refused to touch the children with his hands. He was afraid that they would infect him. She wishes her husband could change. She wants to keep her family together. Her middle daughter has kidney problems. She needs constant medical attention. She's already had one surgery. Her husband's employer provides medical insurance, and he pays for the house in which they all live, she and her children live. So you can see in a situation like that, no one is able to get the kinds of things they need to have a really happy, healthy life, least of all the children. Women need support to leave violent relationships. Take their children with them, and they need it from all aspects of the community. They need it from social services, they need it from child protective agencies, they need it from welfare agencies, they need it from the medical community, schools, and neighbors. We need to educate. So we stop asking the question, why does she stay? And we start asking the question, why is he violent? Then hold him accountable for criminal behavior. A woman stays for many reasons. We went over that this morning. The least being, not the least being, that her life and her children's life are in grave danger if she leaves. Our lack of support and understanding is another major reason why women stay. She believes she'll be blamed for not being a better wife and mother, and unfortunately, she often is. Once a woman leaves and is safe, then agencies need to work together to provide her with the services she needs and the services that she wants, so she can begin to heal, and her life and her children's life can begin to heal as well. And all the agencies need to work together so women do not feel blamed. At the same time, a woman needs to understand the severe impact that being in a violent family has had on her children, and so that she will get the services that her and her children need so that that healing process can begin. Researchers cite several things that happen that break the cycle of violence. To stop those who were abused themselves from growing up and continuing to abuse, or stopping the intergenerational cycle of violence that you hear a lot about in the field. They call them non-repeaters, so that someone who was abused, what is it that makes a difference so that they don't grow up and continue the abuse? And they found 4 different things. The first is that the person was likely to have one parent or one adult in their life who provided support and love to them as a child. So again, remove the child from the violence. That person was more likely to be in a supportive relationship with a boyfriend or a spouse or a partner. That person reported fewer current stressful life events taking place. And that person also has had some therapy or counseling in their life where they dealt with their own abuse and what happened to them as children. So, giving those findings, I can't stress enough getting women and children out of violent relationships and getting them safe. And that's why so many things have to change, including just our overall view of the situation and the dynamics and understanding the dynamics. Much of what Jackie talked about this morning, almost a change of attitude among the people in our community, our neighbors, our friends, about what's happening in this family. And so support so that a woman goes. So many times a woman, women start to feel that it's their job to please and to keep things safe and to hold things together. These are the way we are raised as young little girls. And when we can't do that, we start to fall apart and try harder and harder and harder to do that. I don't believe that's a woman's responsibility. I believe that's everyone's responsibility. And so many things need to change in order for a woman to say, this is not my fault. I don't deserve to be abused. This person chose to be violent. I'm going to go away. I'm going to leave this. Lots of things need to happen for that to happen. And the other point of how to break the cycle is we have to really take special care to keep women and children safe once a woman has left. The Department of Justice reported that up to 75% of domestic violence assaults reported to law enforcement agencies took place after the separation. After the woman left and took her children with her, the physical violence continued. 75% of the assaults reported took place after they were already gone. So we have to work harder. Courts have to work harder, agencies have to work harder to keep the separation so that physical violence doesn't continue to occur. If men who have been violent are allowed to continue to see their children, they must be permitted to do so only under supervised visitation. Agencies and courts have to work harder to ensure that perpetrators get into treatment and follow their treatment all the way through to the very end. It's interesting, I always thought that batterer treatment programs were, very unsuccessful and just brought no results whatsoever. However, I read a more recent article on the issue, and what it said was that if someone actually starts it and goes through it to the very end, and then maybe does some more follow-up work, it will start to work. And there are good results that can be seen from it. What happens is that batterers are mandated to go once by the courts. They might go, to go through the whole program by the courts, and they might go once or twice, and then they stop going. And there's no follow-through. There's no court order to follow through that they must keep going. They drop out, and so they never finish. And we have to make sure that if we're going to get them into a treatment program, that they go all the way through to the end, and maybe, if the council recommends it, that they keep right on going. If they need more, that they get more. Because, according to this one article I read, if that happens, it will start to take effect, but it needs to keep happening. We have to work harder to make sure that that happens. And in the meantime, we have to keep women, and especially children, safe from the perpetrator. So that's 3. 4, one way that I think is imperative to break the cycle, and this is a little bit harder to talk about, but I think we need to examine the root causes of our violence as a society. And again, Jackie talked about that a little bit this morning, historical and societal, and generations and hundreds of years of patterns and set ways of thinking. Violence is many-faceted. There isn't just one reason for it. But I think there's one part of the equation that we tend to either leave out or kind of bluff over. And I think we have to start doing that. And it's going to take a lot of bravery and a lot of courage for men and women to come together to do that. But we can't ignore the gender factor that is very much present in this situation. According to uniform crime reports done by the FBI, funded by the U.S. Department of Justice in 1990, and you've heard this one before, 95% of all victims of partner assault are female. You might not have heard this one, 88.7% of persons arrested for violent crimes are male, and 11.3% are female. 30% of female murder victims are killed by husbands or boyfriends, while 4% of male victims are killed by wives or girlfriends. Researchers have found that when women kill, quote, they are far more likely than men to be responding to rather than initiating violence. To ignore this is to do a disservice to males as well as females. I hold little 3-year-old boys in my arms every day. I do not want to see them grow up to be violent. I love them. They are at a greater risk, almost 100% greater risk of growing up to be violent than little girls. And we cannot ignore that. We have got to say, why? We have to really start saying, why? And there's lots of reasons why, but we need to start asking. There's a lot of discussion that women abuse children as much as men abuse children. The figures. Research, and this study just came out a couple months ago, I read it in the Missoulian, that while that might be true with the figures, men are the primary physical abusers of children. Women primarily abuse through neglect or emotional abandonment, or not being able to meet the child's needs, neglecting the child. And again, if there's spousal or partner abuse, the fear is so great, the tension so great, it's very difficult to meet the needs of those children when you've got this hanging over your head. So we need to look at that. We need to look at the stereotypes of our society and the norms we've all been cast into as men and women. And again, it's going to take a brave bunch of men and women to sit down together to reach out to each other and say, what is the significance of the gender issue right here? And we're talking about a world where there's dominance and there's power and there's aggression as a way of getting what we want. We're talking about that politically, we're talking about that corporately, internationally, and apparently in a lot of homes as well. But that's not to say that as women we're immune from that kind of way of operating. Because from 1988 to 1992, violent crime in adolescent girls increased 63%. So that whole concept of operation and might makes right, and let's do things aggressively and violently and control. I say let's teach compassion and nurturing and caring. We think of those qualities as feminine qualities. We think of those qualities as wimpy. They are brave and they are worthwhile qualities. They are true standards and ways to live, to be gentle and compassionate toward each other. I have an excellent book that I've just read. It's a resource that I'd like to share with you that you might want to get. It's called Boys Will Be Boys, Breaking the Link Between Masculinity and Violence. She does an excellent job, both statistically, scientifically, and philosophically, with this gender issue and violence, and looking at it in a way that's empathetic toward what's happening. As I said, this hurts little boys, in my mind, more than it hurts. I mean, it's devastating for everybody. And another resource I'd like to share with you is...
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
It's Miriam Miedzien, Miedzzian. It's an excellent book. Another resource I'd like to share with you is a video called Dream Worlds. It was done by a professor named Sut Jolly from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. I only made up 20 flyers because that's all I was expecting of you. But if you're interested, you can take one or share it. It gives information on the video. The video is for viewing here at the conference up in the resource room, which I believe is, I don't know what number it is, 3-something. It's excellent. It's called Dream Worlds, Desire, Sex, and Power in Rock Videos, MTV Rock Videos. He takes out, yeah?
More copies for you.
Oh.
Everyone wants some.
Okay. It's a very good resource that shows the way that men and women are conditioned into roles. It's for MTV Rock Videos, so it's hitting that young adolescent population. They sit in front of MTV Rock Videos, sometimes 4 and 5 hours a day, starting when they're about 12 or 13 years old. It's the idea that men are in control, that they have the power. So I think in order to break the cycle, we have to look at that, and we have to look at that maturely, and we have to look at that without blame. The very final thing I think we need to do is to start teaching young children alternatives to violence. We have to start in preschool. We have to start in public schools, kindergarten, all the way up to grade 12 with the appropriate curricula. In agencies, wherever there's children's programming, any agency that has an opportunity to spend any time with children, I don't care what the agency is, needs to start working with children as far as alternatives to violence. But that's not all. Children need to learn to value themselves. They need to learn to value others, to appreciate diversity, to appreciate conflict, to solve conflict in nonviolent, creative ways. Wherever a little children's environment is, then that environment should operate like a little miniature community where people are respected, where everyone gets to be heard, where power is shared. It's just a little miniature community right here. We're here together for 8 hours. Now how are we going to treat each other? How are we going to work together? And I think if we could do that, then we could get the classroom back to the place where learning takes place so that children can learn skills and vocations and become self-sufficient in the adult world. That's not happening in classrooms. Right here in Missoula, I heard 68% of vice principal time is spent on discipline. And the figure for classroom discipline is pretty close too. So let's get into the schools, let's get into preschools, let's get into children's programming, and start teaching children to share power and to respect each other as well as themselves. We have to teach children, especially boys, how to nurture and parent children, that being a nurturing, gentle father is very, very courageous and very worthwhile. I think all children need to learn parenting skills. And I'd like to read just one section from this for you. Boys will be boys. And this is called School Programs That Work. She says, most students at the Germantown Friends Lower School in Philadelphia take child rearing classes starting in kindergarten. By 6th grade, each child is assigned to the school's daycare center to take care of a toddler for several hours a week. In 7 New York City school districts, elementary school students take classes in conflict resolution. After 2 years, the children choose several classmates who go through mediation training and then help schoolmates resolve conflicts nonviolently. And by the way, that's happening in Missoula here at Lowell School, and I think they're extending that program to another school, grades 3, 4, 5. So it's coming here, and it's something that can go in your community, and there's lots and lots of good curricula out there to help with that. At Roxbury High School in Susquehanna, New Jersey, some seniors are taking a course called the Vietnam Generation. It stresses critical thinking, empathy, and the deglorification of war. And it deals head-on with difficult, controversial issues of the kind that many social studies textbooks shy away from. Programs and classes like these exist here and there around the country. We are serious about reducing violence. They must become the norm rather than the exception. And she says that it was clear to me from the research discussed in the last chapter that child rearing would have to be a part of any major effort to decrease male violence. It would reinforce empathy and caring, legitimize young boys' interest in babies, and encourage them to think of themselves as future nurturing fathers. It would give them understanding of child development and heighten their awareness of the importance and responsibility of fatherhood, thereby decreasing the likelihood of their becoming teenage fathers. If and when they did become fathers, their sharing in the demanding task of nurturing children would make it considerably easier for their wives or girlfriends to be good mothers. The quality of mothering would also be vastly improved if girls took child rearing classes. And she goes on to say that the affirmation of boys' empathetic, caring feelings of connectedness with others and their intimate connection with life-giving would tend to decrease the need for the excitement, power, and camaraderie found in youth gangs. I believe that needs to happen if we're going to break the cycle. And the last thing I want to say is my concluding remark. We are not going to be able to teach any of that to children if we cannot model it for them as adults. We must say that violence is unacceptable, and we must mean it. We must not tolerate men assaulting women and children. We must treat the assault like the crime that it is. We must not tolerate women assaulting anyone either. We must not tolerate violence, period. And unless we mean that, children, they won't learn that. They will see us say one thing, but do another. So I think for my own self and the violence that's within me, and believe me, there is some, lots of it sometimes, I work really hard to become a nonviolent person and to model that behavior for the children that I work with. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard.
I've been doing domestic violence work for the past 15 years, and a few years ago I started doing community contracts with Indian Health Services within reservation communities in the state of Montana, and one of my assignments was in the Northern Cheyenne, on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. So I went there, and there's a wonderful little tribal college there called Doan Life Community College, Memorial College. Doan Life Memorial College, and I did a couple things there. One is that I wrote a violence studies curriculum, and I taught part-time those violence studies classes. he was there teaching while I was doing other community work. And David is the head of the Drug and Alcohol Studies Department at Del Mar Memorial College. Now, I don't know how much any of you are involved in either of the fields. Obviously, you're interested in both fields, but I don't know how much either of you are involved. But if you're very involved, you know that there's been a history of not real seeing eye to eye between drug and alcohol programs and domestic violence workers. So I thought this person was interesting to start out with. And we connected and started going out and etc. But part of that whole process, I think that David is a wonderful man, and I still had all of my domestic violence biases toward toward drug and alcohol philosophy. And I also have been very committed for a long time to seeing that both areas work together, because it just doesn't make sense for us to be at such odds. So that's something that I discussed and explored an awful lot. Do you want to talk about your response to my discussion and exploration?
I hated it. And it still makes me angry. But that's what I'm doing, having to look at that. I think that's really important. A little over a year ago, I couldn't have said I was angry about it, because I couldn't even have talked about it probably. So that's been part of who I am growing. But I'm also recognizing I work as a counselor trainer, really. At the college, we do a 2-year associate's degree in drug and alcohol studies, and so we've been turning out chemical dependency counselors, and basing that primarily on the Minnesota model of case management and going that route. What started to happen is I started to understand little by little what Jackie was talking about, and that was not easy. I did not like to hear words like privilege. So as soon as that came up, I was done for a while. But what I started to recognize more and more, and made sense to me more and more, was that certainly within the community that I'm working in the Lame Deer community in the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, that the dynamics of oppression that exist for everyone there, and the implications that that has on alcohol abuse, chemical abuse, alcoholism, and what the response to that is, I was starting to realize that we had a lot to learn from battered women's movement, who were experts in this, and understanding the dynamics of oppression and what that meant and how that got in the way and how it didn't meet the needs of people experiencing oppression. So I kind of got excited about that piece of it, because I really do want to see the best counselors available coming out of the program and giving everything that they can. And this seemed like a very important link. Also, a lot of area that needed to be explored. The reality was it's so tough to explore it, because I don't want to hear that I'm wrong. I don't want to hear all the things that need to be said and need to be explored. It's very hard for me to question. And I think that I have that very same thing in common with people that are in the CD field. So that this is what we do, this is how we do it. We've been doing it for 50 years this way, and we've got millions of people in recovery, so what's the big deal? And coming to the realization, yeah, we have millions of people in recovery, we're also missing millions and millions and millions of people, so we want to expand that. I'm finding myself in a really interesting situation in the classroom, because I'm teaching what the body of knowledge is and saying you need to know this, but also teaching this may not be the way it is in the near future. So it's I'm having fun with that right now. A year ago I could not have had fun with that. 2 years ago I couldn't even have seen it.
And we've been together for 3 years. So. Think about how that first year must have been.
So, it's been an interesting marriage, all the way around.
We'll discuss just kind of that ethical paradox and expansion of ourselves toward the end. But I wanted to give you at least a little bit of background that this was a real, I think that this is a good example of marriage of those ideas, or combination and exploration that can happen between us two. If it can happen between us two, it can happen between fields. If it can happen between you two and you two and you two, then we start doing some expansion. But we will go into that a little bit more. Another thing that I want to say just briefly is that I think that as a domestic violence worker, had I spent my time working out of Billings and the larger cities in Montana and not doing reservation work, my interest in really asking questions about the recovery movement or drug and alcohol philosophy would not have been as rapid as it was working within reservation communities. Most of the reservation communities in Montana, at least, and several around the nation, have recognized that drug and alcohol abuse is a major problem. So within, depending on what area it is, but within some of the reservation communities, there's a real healthy response to that and a real understanding of drug and alcohol and addictions and looking at feelings from that direction. So when I went in as a domestic violence worker, and there are these people that are already plugged into this system, that's how they're maintaining their health, even though it did not quite jive with domestic violence philosophy, or parts of it didn't quite jive, I recognized that it was very important, and it was a lifesaver, and it was a useful tool for people to have. So it was not my job to go into a community and to go into a culture, any culture, to go into the 12-step culture and say, well, you know, you guys are all doing it wrong. It's my job to go in and say, look, here's this expertise as far as violence goes. Here's this expertise as far as oppression goes. And what can we do together? How are these similar? How are they different? How does it feel this way and that way? So there's a lot of exploration that I did that, again, I wouldn't have done because I wouldn't have had to do, because I could have just stayed within my little pocket. If I were in Billings, Montana, I could refer people to treatment if I needed to, or kind of ignore it, or kind of just say, oh, that treatment center did that again, to women when they came back from there. So I feel like I've been real integrally involved in an evolution within some of the communities and around the state as far as that goes. Another thing, just briefly, because we're not going to talk about this specifically, but because I already brought up reservation communities, because I've done domestic violence work in reservation communities, and because because I've done domestic violence work in reservation communities, people have said often, oh, you work on the reservation, you must see an awful lot more violence there. Or make assumptions about the drug and alcohol abuse in reservation communities. Now, I don't know what all the statistics are as far as drug and alcohol use and abuse in reservation communities, and I acknowledge that it's a major problem. However, I think that the same dynamics happen outside of reservation communities. And my experience as a domestic violence worker are that there is no more domestic violence going on in reservation communities than what I see next door to me and up the road in Billings, Montana, and then I hear about in Missoula, Montana. So just to reinforce that these problems cut across the board, and no, Indians are not more prone to violence than white people are prone to violence. And that's all I'm going to say about that at this point. We're going to talk about oppression in a little bit. So just keep that in mind, and I wanted to say that because I know that a lot of times when I do this talk, that's one of the questions that people want to ask, and sometimes I don't get a chance to. Another thing is that we have a whole bunch of material to cover. Please ask questions. So it's more fun for us if we have a discussion going, and I think that that all of us learn more if we do that.
I'm going to also just add in my experience working in the CD field, it's always been kind of like, you know you're doing your job if you're face-to-face with some denial, and if people are getting angry back at you for what you're saying, and it's kind of like, geez, I must be doing something right. When I went into and developed this course of study in the college in drug and alcohol, because the community was open arms to it, I was a golden boy. I admit it. I got the best office. I got everything. questions for me. As just an interesting dynamic, as we've started to bring this content in and start saying things within the college, I'm no longer the old one. And I think that that is real significant for people that are looking at, yeah, we do want to do this, but to recognize it's not going to be easy and people are going to be mad at you. And you're going to run into stuff all the time. And maybe that's the challenge to things. It's time to grow. I do know that. It's time for us as a field to grow.
Jackie, the only thing I would say is, and we've heard this repeatedly, is we cannot blame drugs and alcohol for domestic violence. That's the other side of the coin.
Right.
I mean, we hear this all of the time, well, he only gets me when he's drunk. You know, that's not true.
He's always drunk. Yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna discuss that a fair amount. Thank you. One, I'd like to find out who's here. How many CD people are here?
We'll get him up there.
Okay. And what other fields are people in?
I'm a child advocate.
Okay.
I'm also in domestic violence and alternatives to violence.
Family preservation. Family preservation.
I'm a child care worker.
Social
Teacher.
Law enforcement.
parenting classes.
Great. Got a good mix here. What I'm going to do is to read to you, which I hate people doing, but I think this is really important. As the first sheet on the after the outline. This was written by Evan Stark and Ann Flitcraft. Ann Flitcraft is actually a physician who's done a lot of research in domestic violence work, and Evan Stark is a sociologist. And their statement is that continued work in the battered women's movement helped us recognize that the clinical record of pathos was less an objective picture of women's lives than a profoundly biased justification of what clinicians felt and did when they were confronted by abuse. Clinicians were being passive-aggressive by reporting women's escalating problems, but taking no cognizance of abuse or of how their own failure to respond appropriately might be contributing to escalating problems. The resulting image of victimization and helplessness rationalized the withholding of care. Worse, clinicians projected their own resistance to the woman and then read it back as reluctance on her part. Then this reading was reinforced through minimization of the violence, victim-blaming labels, and a range of punitive interventions whose cumulative effect was to reduce a woman's autonomy so that she became the passive, multi-problem victim of circumstances that had originally been projected. The clinical facts portrayed women whose souls have been crushed by the inscrutable and hostile other. What we learned was that the clinical response had a good deal to do with these facts. I think that this translates real well into CD work or into a lot of other agency work. Those of us who are the clinicians, the helpers, need to really assess ourselves. We need to really examine ourselves so we are not exacerbating the problem. So that's the introduction, and I'd like you, this fits in with every single section that we do, so just keep paying some attention to that. You have a handout. It's not in the packet that we gave you, but Sandy put it, it's in under my lecture on the first day. It's called Alcohol Abuse. Oh, it is, I'm sorry. Alcohol Abuse and Domestic Violence. We were doubly efficient. I'm not going to read this whole thing. This is some really good basic information though, so you can look at it later. And some of the basic stuff that you need to know about drug and alcohol are, like Lucille said, alcohol abuse does not cause domestic violence. Alcohol abuse can make the results of domestic violence more severe, but it does not cause domestic violence. Alcohol abuse and battering are two separate issues. An alcoholic who is a batterer has two issues that need to be identified and two issues that need to be addressed. Going to treatment and quitting the alcohol abuse does not make the battering quit. You have batterers that have quit drinking that way. Batterers that just don't drink anymore. Every once in a while I get a gentleman that comes and talks to me disavow that phenomenon. He comes and says, oh, you know, somebody referred me to you, and I used to hit her a lot when I was drinking, but I haven't been drinking for a year, and I hit her. And that makes me really scared, because I thought that I was done with that. I thought that's what made it happen. So tell me, you know, how come this is making it happen? I think that there hasn't been a real good sense in the CD field that treatment, drug and alcohol treatment, does not end some of those other problems. Okay. Another thing that I'm going to say is that a batterer will not quit battering unless the irresponsible drug abuse is dealt with. There are behaviors that are going to keep going on and keep going on. Some of the behaviors might tone down if you have an alcoholic that is abusing and goes to batterers classes. But they aren't free. I mean, you all know that. They aren't free to make very good choices if they're still in the midst of their addiction. I think that a lot of people make the assumption that all cases of domestic violence, or 90% of cases of domestic violence, have some alcohol use or abuse involved. I've heard statistics, and there's been a lot of research done, and the statistics vary, but it's anywhere from 60% to 85% to 94%. So what you need to be aware of is that there are a number of people who are batterers that don't ever use alcohol, and we need to make sure that we're not making assumptions, or that one of the first questions that we ask a battered woman or a batterer is, well, were you drinking? Okay. That's part of an assessment, but that's not all of it. And if we go in with the assumption that the alcohol causes it, we do a couple of things. One, we taint our good capacity for assessment. Plus, we can tend to reinforce a batterer's idea that, oh, if they're asking if I was drunk, that must mean that that's the reason it happened, and kind of let him off the hook for the battering behavior. Okay.
One of the things that I've been look at is how is it that as CD professionals we come in and re-victimize, that we come in and don't do a very good job for a number of reasons in working with batterers. Again, I think we have some basic assumptions that need some basic changes. The basic assumption that many of us may operate under is, if he gets sober, he'll stop hitting. That's a basic assumption, and that's going to drive the treatment process. That basic assumption. And so those are some of the questions we need to start looking at. No, there's some other assumptions that we need to bring in here to give us momentum, to get an idea of what we need to do, how do we respond. The cycle of oppression. Find in there. And what we wanted to do with this, this is a worksheet that Jackie carries with her and has for years. And so then we take a look at this and we want to make the connection. How has CD field actually gotten into this cycle of oppression and acted as an oppressor? And if we can admit that we're doing that, then we can begin to say, what do we need to do differently? Because we all know that's not okay. Do you want to just cover?
Actually, let me just say this. When we're talking about oppression, I think that we need to be real clear about that, because a lot of times when we've worked in whatever fields we've worked in, we assume that everybody has the same understanding or definition of words. In my mind, when I'm saying oppression, and within the battered women's movement, it has to do with power. It's like I was talking about yesterday. There's a power imbalance for oppression to occur. You have to have a power plus prejudice to equal oppression. So, if you have a relationship like this person might snipe at this person might snipe at this person. They may say ugly stuff, and that might be mean and abusive and not bad and ugly and not very good, but it's not oppressive. If, however, you have somebody that has this kind of power, a little bit more power, whether it's societally given or whether it's snatched by the person, this person has the capacity to be oppressive. this person can say stuff. They can be mean, they can be abusive, they can be ugly, but they do not become this person's oppressor in that situation. Now, in our lives, all of us are at different levels. I may be down here because I'm a brown person. I may be down here because I'm a woman. But I may be up here because I have a house to live in. I may be up here because
Education.
Smart.
because I'm smart now. Yeah, because I have an education that is considered traditionally acceptable within our society. Okay, so I'm not saying that for me I'm always down here and I'm always at risk of being oppressed, nor am I saying, oh, here I am, a privileged person. What I'm saying is we all need to assess where we're here and where we're here. But this is vital to understand. If I'm a battered woman, I might say ugly, mean things. I might, this one woman told me that she came to a group and she said she called her husband a shithead, and he hit her, he slapped her. And so, and battered women say this kind of thing all the time. I'm just as abusive as he is. But, I mean, I knew her and I knew her history, and he had hit her in the past, and he had this kind of power. So she did a thing that wasn't very nice, calling him a shithead,
But he was, huh?
I didn't tell her that. She did a thing that was not very nice, but by doing that, she was having this kind of reaction, but she didn't move up to here because she used that not nice tactic. Okay, so that's just brief.
I'd throw in, as counselors, we have this. As agencies, we have this.
As advocates, we have this.
And this is the part that I think we've fallen down on and not admitted. We're saying, oh no, I'm not prejudiced against battered women. Like we were saying yesterday, I'm an expert. You know, I read an article once that makes me, I'm a priest, I'm an expert. And so we have that, but we do have prejudice. And that's what we want to show here is how that prejudice really does fit in and what happens and how it becomes oppressive and how that's acted out by caregivers.
Okay, so look at your cycle of oppression. I'm going to do just a brief example using myself or using Mexican women. Number one, on the cycle of oppression, looks like this. There has to be a perception of difference for the cycle of oppression to get started. So there has to be something that you recognize is different, or that society recognizes as different. So if my brownness is one recognizable factor, I look like a brown person, I'm identifiable, I'm a little bit different some way or another, my name's Garcia, that's identifiable. What happens in the second place is that negative characteristics of individual brown people, my individual brown self, are identified. So say I have neighbors and I yell at my kids a lot, and so my neighbors hear me going outside saying, "You guys gotta come in here right now, hurry up!" And my neighbors get together, or they notice that. It's like, oh, this brown woman yells at her kids a lot, and she seems like she's not necessarily real respectful when she does that. So that's one negative factor that's identified. My negative factor, it belongs to me as an individual. Then the negative gets generalized to encompass the whole group. My neighbor thinks, geez, I wonder if just brown Mexican women yell at their kids a lot, and they must just all be like that. I mean, it's kind of this, it's not as clear for us when we're in the middle of it, but that's how it happens. Gosh, Jackie Garcia yells at her kids. Mexican women yell at their kids a lot. It's not a good thing. We move on to number 4. Negatives are verified and reinforced with experiences, either our own or other people's accounts. So say that the women in my neighborhood get together for coffee, and they start talking, and one of them says, "Here's Jackie Garcia. Really yells at her kids," and this other one says, "Yeah, I used to live by these other Mexicans, and that woman was always yelling at her kids. I just can't believe it." And the other one says, "Well, you know, I kind of noticed that, or I've heard that on TV. I saw it on Starsky and Hutch one time. There was this, this brown woman." So there's this discussion among each other that verifies the generalization of the negative that was already occurring with the individual, but you kind of get together and it's like, oh, yeah, that's a problem. what happens then is people feel justified in treating people, the general category of people, Mexican women, unjustly because of the individual negative that they've identified with me. Say we have a babysitting co-op in our neighborhood, and because these women have all sat around and said that Jackie Garcia yells at our kids a lot, and Mexican women all do that, and there are a few of, 2 or 3 of us that are Mexican that belong to the babysitting co-op, but they're familiar with me because I live next door to them. They decide that they're not going to leave their kids with me, or with the rest of the Mexican women for that matter, because Mexican women are all kind of abusive to their kids and don't take good care of them that way. So they've just justified an unjust treatment. And they haven't just done it to me, they have used me as a way to justify their unjust treatment toward everybody else. This institutionalized treatment through established rule and policy, I can't think of a clear follow-through if we're talking about babysitting co-op. Some things that might happen would be something like redlining. Babysitting co-op people only use people on the north side of Billings after 8 o'clock at night, and not on the south side of Billings. And the justification, it's a convoluted justification that most of the Mexican women in babysitting co-op live on the south side, and so it's a way to kind of exclude them from the whole process. And it's done by rule, but it's not. It doesn't say, well, we're going to exclude the Mexican women. It says we have this rule, and it's a good rule, and here are all the reasons why. But the underlying note is that they're excluded for other reasons, and it has to do with oppression. I'm going to do another just real quick example of that. I used to work at, I worked at a women's clinic in Billings, and we had a great group of people, good feminist, alert, thinking people. So it really surprised me that this incident happened there. We were in a staff meeting one time, and there was one woman who was particularly in charge of loans. We made loans for services to women, and at one of our staff meetings, she said, well, I have a new policy that I would like us to adopt, and that's that Indian women not receive loans, or that we make them answer these other questions besides the ones that we ask regular people. And the rest of us on the staff went, what are you talking about? That's racist. You can't do that. And she said, no. I have my files here. And here's this Indian woman, and this Indian woman, and this Indian woman, so who have not paid back their loans. Besides that, I can't find out where to get them. They don't have phone numbers, so there's no way for me to hound them and harass them. There's no way for me to hound them and harass them. So she identified negative characteristics, at least in her mind, negative characteristics of these Indian women, and then she said, so we're not getting payback from Indian women, all Indian women, because of the few that she had identified. And not only that, but she had gone to Great Falls to a workshop that would help her in her job, and it had to do with loan collection. And what people sat around and discussed in Great Falls was, yeah, Indian people don't pay back their loans, and they're not very good on credit stuff. And so there's all this little gaggle of people reinforcing what she was already thinking she was figuring out by looking at her own records. So what we had heard and were about to confront her on anyway was that her tone was different when she talked to Indian women, when she was doing a loan interview with them. Okay, now why do you just that little bit of gruffness in her voice that made it different. In her mind, it justified the fact that Indian women didn't pay back and they had that negative characteristic, justified her unjust treatment. And here she was in our staff meeting trying to institutionalize her unjust treatment through established rule and policy. Okay, that's how the cycle of oppression works. It's not just that all of a sudden everybody assumes this. But when we're talking about institutions and when we're talking about societal stuff, that stuff has already been established. So it's not like I just jump in and make this up on my own. It's like I make this up on my own and I wonder about it, and then there's a whole bunch of society to reinforce that with me. Okay? okay? We do a lot of othering in our society. The more we can other somebody, the more likely we're going to be jumping in with the cycle of oppression.
Kind of translating that into something that I've seen going on, and I've participated in treatment setting. A battered woman coming in and being recognized right away as she's different, she's a battered woman. So we are there at point one. And then identifying the negative characteristics. Well, and this is our assessment process happening. She's not assertive. That's her problem. So she lacks assertiveness, and she lacks an understanding and application of detachment. So that's what we've said. These are the negative characteristics of that individual. Generalizing those negatives to encompass a whole group. No assertiveness skills. They don't have confrontation skills. So we're saying this group of people, they're all alike. That's how we can make this assessment, because you have one battered woman, you see them all, and none of them can do this, and that's the problem. They need to be able to confront. They're not detaching, so they must be codependent. So we label again with those labels. Verifying and reinforcing those negatives. I see this going on in team meetings. We're kind of like all together, and well, what are we going to do about this? See this, well, you know how they are again. She'll be back for the third time, and she's going to go back, and we start making all these kind of reinforcing those negatives, because that has happened. She has gone back before, and all those other ones went back 5, 6 times. So again, that reinforces that what we're saying is right. We must have a complete understanding of that. Then, moving into the adjunct treatment, and I think that's the piece that we want to take a look at coming up, is that what we end up doing then is really ignoring the battering and the implications. We really ignore that. So we don't pay attention. As a treatment team, we're now participating in lack of attention to a patient or client. And so really the quality assurance question comes in here if we really want to look at it. What we've discussed going, and what I've seen, believe is a piece of this, is that comes out as a lack of an accurate database. That because we're ignoring battering, we're not getting information about that, and then we're basing our response to this individual on a database. We go through all those assessment forms, we collect all this information, but none of it has to do with battering. And so what we end up doing is not seeing the whole person. We've got a piece of it. We've got an incomplete database. And then based on that incomplete database, we have the power, coupled with our prejudice now, to go ahead and give some direction for this person's rehabilitation. And yet, we are basing that on something that's not accurate. What I have seen is that we really are not open to diagnose something that we can't treat. That may be one of the issues going on. So we're not going to say that's a problem if we ourselves can't treat it. Or we label it as something that we've given ourselves permission, or we've given ourselves jurisdiction to treat. In the addiction field, we treat addictions. So if we can turn battering into an addiction, we are the experts. And so that then forms our basic assumption about things. Then we move up into institutionalizing that treatment through established rule and policy. This rule and policy may be written and it may be unwritten. I think an example of unwritten, it just shows up in treatment plans. Making a battered woman, making a woman responsible and accountable for her batter in the treatment plan. Just including that into it, saying part of your treatment plan, this week's objective is that you go home and sit down with your husband and discuss this particular piece of your relationship, and then write a journal about it and come back and we'll talk about it. Well, in order for her to succeed, he has to participate. And so now, his participation has to do with how we perceive whether or not she's actually participating in her treatment. Now, she may say, she knows from experience, it's not safe to sit down and talk about this. I'll get beat up. I don't want to get beat up. So they come back the next week and say, no, I didn't discuss that. And then we may look at that and say, well, they're not following through with their treatment plan.
Non-compliant.
Non-compliant. In denial. Again, because we're basing that behavior out of a lack of understanding, a lack of information on that database.
I worked with a woman once who had come to battered women's support group for quite a while, and she had gotten the system for whatever reason she was, and one of the recommendations of the system was that she go to codependency treatment. So she did that because it had to do with her kids, being with her, not being with her. She did that, but she kept coming to battered women's support group where we would tell her, you know, do what you need to do, and just keep this in mind, you know, keep paying attention. You know that violence is occurring, you know that this is going on, keep real centered, keep with yourself. And so she went one time when she was doing follow-up to her drug and alcohol, her codependency counselor, and her codependency counselor told her, your problem is that you don't stand up to him. You don't stand up to him, and what you need to do is to go and stand up to him. Actually, she didn't go to a session. What happened is she was in town, and her batterer saw her, and when she was on the street, forced her, physically threatened her, forced her to get in the car with her kids, and drove her around for a while. She finally got him to leave her alone by telling him that he could have the car. And so she walked from the middle of town to the treatment place because she was overwrought, and told her CD counselor, this is what happened. And her CD counselor's response was, you don't stand up to him. You've got to tell him he can't do that. And she said, he'll hit me. And the CD counselor said, well, maybe that's what has to happen. This woman was coming back to group and reporting, I told her, but I don't want to get hit. I don't want to get hit. I don't want to get hit. And I think that that's the kind of thing, you know, with these false assumptions, we end up oppressing people. I mean, what kind of thing is that to tell a woman? She knew that if she went and told her husband, now you just get out of my car, she was going to get hit. She was going to get beat up. And her codependency counselor knew that history, yet she still wanted this woman to act assertive. The woman did not act assertive, and she may not have acted assertive. She needed some other assertiveness skills in her life in general, but that's a whole different issue than being assertive with this person that has his boot on your head.
Another area where this comes up real frequently and is in the inclusion of families in the treatment of the alcoholic, who may be male and maybe a batterer, and that as part of his treatment, we tell people that they need to come in and do some work for us. So we invite family members to come in and do their confrontation. We set up this nice little room and dim the lights and say, it's all safe here, you can say anything you want to now. And there is a false sense of safety about that. And so the person goes, okay, well, this is how it was when you did this, and you did this, and you hit me, and this, and that. And it all comes out, and he's trying to look real good because of the peer assessment going on, and everything's real fine. What happens in the parking lot? What happens 30 days later when he gets home from treatment?
Or even what happens at the time when the drug and alcohol counselor confronts this woman based on information that the batterer has given, and ends up saying the same things that the batterer has said to her. Well, why do you do this behavior? Why do you do this behavior? Why do you do this behavior? I've worked with countless numbers of women who have gone as part of Family Week, and their batterer has been in treatment, and they've come back and said, I felt like they were doing his job. He was sitting there being nice, being sweet, and his counselors were telling me, why do you do this? Why do you do this? And I was telling them because he's abusive to me, and they were telling me I was codependent.
Also, I think there is, we're asking family members to do our jobs as counselors. Well, let's drag them in there, and they can break their denial sense, and then I won't have to. And so that seems like, again, power and abuse in a real oppressive state. And there you have family members who are really willing probably to do just about anything to make it all better. And we believe, our basic assumption is that this will make it all better, and they buy that because they believe us because they want to, and we have that, we're the expert.
I have a question about codependency. I think that's really common, especially with people that I know that are recovering alcoholics, especially. That they, at least that's the definition, that they seem to look for people that they can care for and make feel better. Do you see any type of relationship between that, where they go to that extent, where they find someone who ends up abusing them, but that's their codependency? I mean,
I think that again, I think that they're separate issues, and I think that they get all mixed in together, and we're going to talk about that in the next session that will address that exact question.
I had a question. I guess I've had something rolling around in my mind. I represent the kids as they go through the family court system as a guardian ad litem. And I've noticed on a regular basis we do there are service treatment agreements that the Department of Family Services does. And they're all the same. I mean, regardless of the people, it's kind of like get a life, get a job, and go away type of stuff. And so it's been real interesting. We've had two different cases that have come to my mind that I've done where it's been a requirement that the man not be in the home.
Right.
And she's non-compliant if the man is in the home because of the situation. But now, after being here for the last day and a half, part of his being in the home is the safety, keeping herself safe,
And the kids
and the children safe. So she's being non-compliant and risking losing the children. Or I've got one case where the kids have been in foster care for the last 8 months, and they're not going home until he's gone, and he's not going anywhere.
Right. I think that that's a real bind for women. And when women get systems like that, it's the job of CPS workers, it's the job of child care workers to be an advocate for the children. However, you cannot be an effective advocate for the children if you don't look at those other dynamics.
So I guess what I'm trying to find out is what type of recommendations can be made to ensure a reasonable amount of safety for the children, but still allow whatever needs to happen, because I feel terrible that the children are out of the home. They're not with their mother who loves them. The dad, I know, loves the child, but the children are not safe while he's throwing her around the house. So
I think that this needs to be, I think people in the field need to sit down and talk about this. One thing that I've thought of is that what happens at this point is a lot of times, like you're saying, the woman is the one who's going to be compliant. She's going to run around and do everything because she doesn't want to lose her kids. So she's being the very responsible person, not because she's codependent, but because she doesn't want to lose her kids. And you have this batterer, and he's kind of out there in left field. So you don't have, as a CPS worker, you're not putting any sanctions on him because he's probably not going to comply.
well, she's kind of given up. It's gone on long enough that she's kind of given up. Her parents have the children, so she can see them. So it's almost, and we're coming up on the end of a 6 months of temporary custody. We're looking at a termination of parental rights, and I'm having a hard time with that, and have for the last 8 months. But what do you do to make that difference? You know?
I think that as CPS workers, as guardians ad litem, you can make good recommendations. For example, a woman can file for a restraining order against a batterer. However, there are complications involved with that and with the court system. But if you're the guardian ad litem, certainly you can file for a restraining order on behalf of the children. That puts the accountability back with the batterer. Or you can make recommendations to the court that because of these reasons, because of this man's controlling behavior and because of his abuse to the parent, to the mother, the children are at risk of several things, of being 1,500% more likely to be abused, of being, I can't remember what percent more likely to be delinquent, of being whatever more percent likely to be alcoholic. Those are statistics that are there for you. And so if you start thinking of it in terms of the power and control and putting the responsibility back on him, because for the most part, the kids aren't being taken away because because of something that the mom's doing. The kids are being taken away because they're not being protected. But what we're saying is the person that's doing them harm isn't responsible. The person that's having to be put in a hard position is being held responsible for it. And then we give big messages as agencies to batterers because it wasn't their deal. I mean, the wife's got to be in treatment. She's got to be the one going to codependency treatment. She's got the one that's got to go to parenting classes. She's the one that's got to do this. And he boogies out of the house or comes back in as it makes him feel all right. So it really does rest with us individually looking at this and saying, how can he be held accountable? If he is the problem, how can he be held accountable? And how can we work at supporting this woman? And I think that that's a whole attitudinal change that really has to occur, because I think that we've gotten a little bit used to being punitive with battered women. It's like, geez, gosh darn it, protect those children, which is very important. However, if you look at that whole dynamic, she may be doing everything she possibly can, including getting in between the kids and the batterer to protect those kids. We need to give information in a really non-judgmental way. We need to acknowledge to her, not by saying, geez, he's a monster, an asshole, blah, 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 but by saying, I know that he's being abusive to you. This is not all right, and it really affects the kids. Here's Battered Women's Support Group. Here's Karen Thomas. You can give her a call. Here's some information. Here's some reading. Here's something that I heard at this conference that I went to. That's the kind of support that the mother can pick up on, because, I mean, she's going to be really resistant, because what happens is then as institutions, we do the work of the batterer for him. I mean, he can be gone out of the picture, and here we are as institutions saying that you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have done this, you should have done that, you're wrong. So what incentive does she have to leave the batterer if her other option is to be systemed with somebody that's going to be telling her the same thing? I mean, it's half a dozen one, 6 of the other. Is that right? Okay. Well, we have to.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to these.
Okay.
In your, look at 2 sheets here that kind of go together. One of the things that we've been trying to do is take a look at, well, how do we separate these? How do we know what's what? How do we know what is codependent versus what is battered woman being oppressed? What is alcoholic versus what is being a batter? How are those the same? How do they look alike, but at the same time realizing these are really different things? And so how do we really be able to separate those and look at them as different things? And it does look confusing because of the layers that go on. But I think what we want to talk about is this is what you can look for.
Well, you said something a little bit ago, is battering an addiction? Is it an addiction?
No, it's not an addiction. Battering is a learned behavior. Battering is not an addiction. Battering is something that's used in a way that's similar to how addictions are used.
It's a learned thing to smoke and drink, but an addicted is when you carry it beyond and find a need to keep repeating. Is that not a little bit of what battering is?
We're ironing this out right now. Looking at what is loss of control. That's a term that's used in the CD field, loss of control over the inability to predict times or amounts or outcomes of chemical use, versus what is loss of control when the batter says, oh, I lost control. That's why I hit her, because I lost control.
This is a major discussion between us, and I think should be a major discussion between all of us within this field. I am personally reassessing my concept of what an addiction is, because I don't buy it at all that a batterer loses control. A batterer's whole deal is to maintain control. And a batterer makes bad choices, but he is making those choices constantly. Now, when I look at that, and also look at a person who has an addiction, I think what's the difference here? We're saying that this person who has an addiction has a loss of control here. I don't know. What I'm saying is that I'm exploring that. I think that there are major similarities, but I am quite sure that battering is not an addiction and that battering is not a loss of control. Battering is a hyper sense of control and a hyper controlling attitude. So there's no loss of control in there. And if that's one of the definitions that we use for an addictive behavior, battering doesn't even fit in there at all.
One of,
But by the same token, an addictive personality is a person also that makes some pretty poor choices. And to get out of that cycle, you have to learn how to make better choices.
Right. Let us put these. You have that ability to respond. Let's put these on the overhead.
We've got about 10 minutes to 12.
Ah, okay.
we requested an hour and a half.
The wheels are, first of all, the self-defeating response. This would be considered an alcoholic or a codependent person. You have a self-defeating response to a stressor. Self-defeating response in the addict's case would be use of alcohol. Okay, irresponsible use of alcohol. That causes harm and injury to that person because they're creating havoc in their own lives. It leaves them at a vulnerable and weak place. And then when they have another stressor, they're more likely to use the same self-defeating response. So you get on this whole cycle.
Coupled with, as the vulnerability and weakness grows, the experience of stress grows. Maybe the same stressor, but it's going to be experienced as a much bigger thing. And since the answer in an addictive cycle is the same one that didn't work before, only more of it, we get into the increasing tolerance, and at some point, one of the things we're discussing is the neurochemical stuff that's going on, and how is that linked in with loss of control due to the phenomenon of craving, and how does that get set up? But we're also looking at that may well be true for a certain number of people, but that what we call alcoholic, what people classify as alcoholics, probably extends that a great deal. That it's that group of people plus a whole bunch of other people who are doing things that look the same. And so maybe we're looking at some different types of alcoholisms. By our broad definition, we need to get more defined about what they are, because again, they're all going to require different responses.
Basically, everybody that's an alcoholic does not have, everybody that we call alcoholic in our society does not have that chemical reaction. Okay, so there are two different things to think about just right there. John?
I hear people struggling with this a lot. To me, it's real clear that it isn't the same. There's no compulsion. I've yet to hear a batterer who's saying, no, I was driving around all day looking for somebody, I gotta go beat up. I gotta feel the flesh against flesh today, or else I'm just gonna freak out. Or having not been not battering anybody for 2 weeks, do I hear anybody going into withdrawal? The other part of that is that the battering works.
Right.
There's a direct line from a goal, an intended behavior, and an outcome. And when that outcome happens, the behavior stops.
Right. I think does that help? I think that provides a lot of clarity. I think that what we're doing with these sheets has to do with some questions that are up for a lot of people, and people are going to ask you those, and when we ask ourselves. But I think that's the bottom line. It isn't a compulsion. It isn't a loss of control. It's something that works. It's behavior that works to get the batterer what he wants, which is control.
If we're going to think that way, we have to say that burglary is an addiction. That any other crime we can think of, embezzling is an addiction.
Thanks.
I'm not going to make that statement.
That's good clarity. Okay.
I guess I just want to quickly know, do most people come for help, right? Usually is that window of opportunity, right, and when they're in the vulnerability weakness stage, or when there's harm or injury?
I think here,
Down there.
my experience.
That's where a batterer comes for help.
And then what about somebody with a chemical dependence? Same thing, or somewhere right in
nobody comes to help because they want to. for addiction.
But again,
You know, I mean, it may look like, yeah, I want to, but the reality is, if the alternative to wanting to was better than wanting to, I'd be doing that. So,
also, this is not a diagram for batter. This is diagram for alcoholic. Do you want me to move to the next one? Okay. This is also a diagram that people use for codependence. This would be considered a codependent response.
but the alcoholic can use alcohol as a response, but they also are very adept at using denial as a response to change that perception. And what we see in codependence is that same thing.
This is an oppressed response, okay? An oppressive action occurs toward this person. It comes from outside. It causes harm and injury. This person is not causing harm and injury to herself. This would be basically battered woman, the oppressed person. The oppressive action comes from outside. There's harm and injury, which creates vulnerability and weakness, which makes the stress level higher, which might cause a self-preserving response. A self-preserving response is different from a self-defeating response, even though they may look and often not the same.
I may deny here or deny here. The behavior might be here to minimize. The behavior here might be to minimize. But the outcome here is harm and injury. The outcome here is survival. That if I don't minimize, if I don't say, it doesn't hit me that often, and make him sound like he's real good in front of other people, I may get it. So it's a piece of survival. And so a very smart thing to do. The trouble that I think that we run into in assessment and treatment planning is that this is what we see. They're on top of each other. They're layered. And when we go in with our limited conceptions, if this part is not a part of our database, we don't see it. We don't have that information to operate on. So really, even though this is the whole picture, our eyes are closed because of our limited database, and so this is what we see. And so what it looks like is codependence. Look at me, you know, she's minimizing what's going on. It's causing her harm and injury, makes her vulnerable and weak.
She's responsible for
So
that whole
she's
thing.
responsible.
She's lying, makes her feel bad, that's harm and injury, makes her feel vulnerable, weak. It's her responsibility.
So when we go to write the treatment plan, we're going to tell her what she needs to do to change this. And that makes good sense for this one. Because what needs to change is within that system. It doesn't make sense for this system. What needs to change is not within the system. It's outside of it.
Another thing, when you have the wheels together, there are battered women that have codependent behaviors. And sometimes if you've been treated in an oppressive way and you're doing a self-preserving response, the self-preserving response lying may be the same as a self-defeating response, so it gets all jumbled in there together. It's not just real clear, oh, here I am a battered woman, all the oppression comes from outside, so anything that I do that is a defeating behavior, I'm not responsible for. No. We have a whole jumble of stuff. But the important part is if this isn't recognized, then every responsibility is put on the woman. If this is recognized, then we can see, let me see, that response that I might generally think of as self-defeating is actually self-preservation, which ends up being empowering to the battered woman. I mean, battered women come to me and say, I lied to him, I don't know why I lied, you know, and we start thinking about it. Well, what's happened before when you've told the truth in this instant? Well, he beat me up. Oh, okay, so why did you do it? I did it so I wouldn't get beat up. That's survival. It begins to be empowering, and it gives her a different option, a different way of looking at things. she can see that the self-preserving response might be a movement towards self-enhancing, and that she's not responsible for this other stuff. If a person makes a self-enhancing response, there's growth and development. They gain strength and they're able to be more resistant. When there's a stressor, it doesn't affect them as much as if they were in that vulnerable position. Jackie, could you give an example of this one?
Would this be after the batterer has been stopped?
Yeah, because you don't see anything coming from here. A person can't totally move into this system, which is we have it called an enhancing system.
I see here as a woman who, as a self-enhancing response, goes back to school. Okay? And gains growth and development and some financial security that was not available to her before. Strength and resistance, it makes a difference. Life is a lot less stressful when you have money.
But the outside input had to
Right.
be stopped first.
Right, because when you lay this one on top of that, that makes it impossible. If you're not allowed to go out of the house, if you're not allowed to have friends, I'm afraid to do it. I could go back to school. And so here I am. And that may get read as, you know, she's really not reaching her potential. She should go back to school. And so maybe we write that into the vocational aspect of the treatment plan. And there he is, at school. I experienced that. I have women in my classroom when their batterer comes to the class and drags them out. And so there we are, back to non-compliance. Well, she's just not motivated. She really doesn't care about her life. She's not going back to school.
And another thing that we need to realize is that all three of these are going to be happening at the same time to some extent, because sometimes the batter's or the impressive response isn't going to affect every single aspect of her life. It's going to be major, but she can, battered women do self-enhancing responses, and there's growth and enrichment even in the midst of their being battered. Our jobs as advocates, as treatment providers, as counselors, are to kind of help her sort these out and separate them. And our jobs personally are to separate those for ourselves so we can be a good facilitator of that process for her.
I think it's hard enough to separate it and hard enough to spot it when you are looking. And you do have the database, but it's absolutely impossible to know.
You have a paper that says alcoholic, relationally addicted, and battered women. We don't have enough time to go over a lot of this, but what we did is that we looked at alcoholic. We have an alcoholic is obsessed with alcohol. It's an issue of control. That's the first wheel.
The attempts at control is what's defeating. Attempting to control something that is not controllable.
The other thing with, and you also have batter. Batter is not written on here, but I'd like you to take this home and kind of play with it. You have a batter who is not only doing this to himself in a self-defeating response, but also is putting the harm and injury outward. Okay? So we have a self-defeating response, and we have an oppressive response that comes from that batter's self-defeating response. Relationally addicted person, a codependent, is obsessed with the relationship. That has to do with control and controlling the relationship. But a battered woman has to do with being controlled. It's the batterer and not the battered woman who is obsessed with the relationship. The battered woman has to be aware of what's going on, so it looks like she might be obsessed with the relationship, but what she's really obsessed with is knowing where he is so she knows what she has to do so she's not going to be hurt. Go down all of these and add batter in your mind and sit together with some people and discuss that. I think that this is real interesting just to play with these. It's a good tool. It's a good start. This is not a whole answer for everybody, but it's a good start for you to start looking at this in a different way. I think we've got to like that.
Yep. Included in the packet are some suggestions for some assessment tools And these are the kinds of things we need to start including in chemical dependency, preliminary assessment, and initial assessment. We're a great screening place. Even if we don't have the ability to treat it, we still have the ability to screen for it and to be able to recognize it and make referrals or make the statement that there's no place to refer this to. And we've got some data collected on that, so there's some important piece of just that. But this helps to get the database more complete. That these questions are the kinds of things that we can be including. I think that one thing that the CD field has going for it in our treatment centers and treatment caregivers have going for them, a lot of them already work in multidisciplinary teams. It's already set up. And that process, if we use it with a complete database, can have some phenomenal effects for a person. But if we don't screen for this, then we're not going to include a family violence or domestic violence expert in our team because we don't need them. We already are the experts. And so one of the things that I wanted to mention here in terms of team building is that ethically, we owe it for quality care of that patient to do a couple of things. One is identify a person within our team to become the expert, to start sending them to workshops, because we really have to admit we don't know this stuff. The other is to take a look around our communities who does know this stuff. The sheltered women's movement, what do you have? I mean, years of excellent research, and this is how we do it. There's success going on there and some knowledge. And again, the CD field has tended to ignore that and almost kind of like and she uses the word arrogant, I don't like that, you know. But that idea that, you know, well, the shelter, you know, that's kind of like beneath us down here, what would they have to teach us? The reality is they have a whole lot to teach us. And it's not their job to teach us, it's our job to ask. They're the experts, let's get them in our team and open our minds and ears to listen to them.
I want to just point this sheet out to you. It says treatment planning considerations, and it has if a man abuses substances and is violent, and also if a woman abuses substances and is a victim of violence. So even though we didn't mention that specifically, certainly a woman can be an alcoholic and be using self-defeating behaviors, but that doesn't make her not a battered woman, and that doesn't make her battering the cause, the fact that her drinking doesn't make her a battered woman. That makes sense. Okay. This is a good sheet. It just gives some simple guidelines. And the last, there's the 12-step controversy, an article in your packet. It was written by Charlotte Davis Castle, who, by the way, lives in Lolo now. Charlotte's not in the room, is she? Okay. Charlotte Davis Castle is a woman who has done a lot of thinking on drug and alcohol, is a counselor, and came from a 12-step system, 12-step model, and has used it successfully and recommended it to her clients, etc. But she started getting feedback from some of her clients that this just doesn't work for me. How come this doesn't work? And so she did a lot of research, and she has a book right now out that's called Many Roads, One Journey, that talks about other options besides the 12 steps for looking at treatment of alcoholism. One thing that the 12 steps is lacking, that this article points out, is that the 12-step model was made years ago by nice middle-class white guys. And it's for people within that system.
Makes total sense to me.
It's a real male-oriented system. It's a real privilege-oriented system. So when you have people that have been oppressed, battered women, minority people, there's nothing within that 12-step system that gives a power analysis. So it all looks like it's all my fault. And if I just say that I'm powerless over, then it will work. Well, if I'm somebody that's been pretty powerless in life because society's made me that way, this does not make sense. I've talked to numbers of people on Indian reservations who've said, hey, you know, 12 steps saved my life, and I quit drinking and I used 12 steps because that was what was there. But I didn't like it, and it didn't really make sense, but I used it. it's
And
our...
rewrote it and redefined it and said the words, but they meant something different.
Mhm, for themselves. So Charlotte Castle, at this point, after talking to a lot of people, has a recommendation or just an alternate suggestion, which is 16 steps, and it takes the power, into consideration. So again, we didn't get a chance to talk about all of this. David and I do workshops. We'd encourage you to get together with people in your fields and discuss this. In order for us to really be good at what we're doing, we need to start asking questions like that. Like, well, wait a minute. Isn't battering an addiction? And not to ask it, I think that's been asked, and DV people have heard that asked, like, oh, give me a break, because we've been asked it in terms of, it must be an addiction because this is the way we see it and this is the way that we're going to treat it. It's a serious question. We need to discuss it. What is an addiction? We need to be not a static group of people. We need to keep thinking, well, maybe there's something else that's a different option. There's growth in fields, there's growth personally, and we need to do that in order to be the best advocates, the best workers, and the best people that we possibly can.
I just kind of want to end with what I talk about is the ethical paradox here. And for me, that's real important as a trainer of counselors, that Montana has a state code of ethics for addiction counselors, and one of those ethics refers to the fact that we have to have an understanding of the current body of knowledge. And if we don't, we can't get certified. We also have an ethic that says we have to share our findings with others and continue the growth of this. I see us kind of in a bind. We've got this big certification process, and now it's being real black and white. This is what you need to know, and I'm afraid that now could lead us to really getting stuck there, and that's what I'm finding with my students. It's like I have to say to them, you have to know this, and I'm going to teach you as if this is the truth. But at the same time, if you're going to be ethical and know this, you also have to be ethical by challenging it and saying, maybe this is not the end all and we don't know everything. And it is very confusing, and yet I think past that confusion is the sense that, oh, maybe I really am a part of something that's really alive here. And that idea of being expansive, that 2 million people isn't enough anymore. That what about these others, and how can we make sure that things are available to them? So I think there is a paradox there within the ethics, but I think that those ethics are there to protect us and to energize us, and to me that's what I'm hearing. That's how I'm seeing it, that, okay, I can be an expert in this body of knowledge the way it exists, but we can't just let it exist. We have to move and share our findings. And I'm realizing more and more and more how brave it is to share those findings, because they aren't met with a great deal of acceptance or kindness, because they're threatening.
He really loved me, and he had a real hard time with the fact that I even said, oh, wait a minute, let's just look at this. Nobody said anything about this.
I tried to figure it out.
It's addiction and battering.
Very good. Addiction and battering. All mixed up.
Superimposed on each other.
So that's what our job is, so
And
go
that's
for
what it looks like a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.